So my work is to chair the session, and we have 1 hour 30 minutes. So including discussion. So I would request Professor Pankaj Jain, फ्लेम यूनिवर्सिटी पुणे. सो यूनिवर्सिटी कैसे फ्लेम बन गया, ये मेरे प्रॉब्लम हो गया. सो फ्लेम यूनिवर्सिटी पुणे, he will be given 15 to 20 minutes, which will be followed by discussion if possible. So over to Professor Pankaj Jain, please.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Adi Nataraju, for organizing this seminar, inviting all of us, including me. FLAME University, sir, FLAME is an acronym. FLAME stands for Foundation for Liberal Arts and Management Education, FLAME. That is how FLAME Jwala ban gayi, Jyoti bani Jwala.
Very good, very good.
So this is the campus you see on my background here. When Professor Nataraju told me about methods, I was reminded of my ex-colleagues at the University of North Texas in Dallas, where I was almost for a decade before coming back to India. So I thought I'll speak on a relatively newer field of philosophical methods that is being developed now in the US and other countries. But I think, in my humble submission, this is nothing new for India. Our people have been doing these field philosophy for centuries. So I submit to you my whatever observations or conclusions I've developed. I would like to share this PowerPoint, and hope you can see the presentation now. And so the name of this method that they're developing in the US philosophy department, some of them is still a very young emerging field. It's not yet mainstream, but they're calling it field philosophy or public philosophy also. So field philosophy or public philosophy as a method for philosophical investigation, indic exemplars, those who have already done these things over centuries. So if I quote Ramachandra Guha's book, The Unquiet Woods from 2000, he had this interesting quote that intellectual seeks total systematic change, but the task of bringing this about is always left to others. So that is what kind of started in the name of objective scholarship during the British Raj. We see people like Max Muller, who started as Orientalists, as armchair analysts. Without ever coming to India, they created all these theories and several books and chapters and essays about India. But that British Raj Orientalism that started in 18th to 19th century, it goes on even today, in my humble opinion. It continues in neo-colonial and neo-Oriental ways. And even within India, I think in some of the ways our scholarship is happening in present-day India can be compared to what Orientalists were doing during the British Raj, or what happens as what can be called as so-called objective scholarship. So it prides itself in calling this method as highly empirical and scientific, but it has little or no interest in solving any actual issue on the ground. One of the, some of the biggest issues of our times that we are fighting or trying to fight or trying to escape from them, trying to mitigate some of those issues, include climate change. And I think there is a long way to go in terms of what scholars are doing or can do. So in contrast to armchair philosophy, or what we all call as objective scholarship or armchair analysis, or empirical or scientific scholarship, in contrast to that, what field philosophy method promises as I said, from my ex-colleagues, is it promises to bridge the divide between ivory tower scholarship and the actual community that funds the very scholarship that they are creating, by their taxes. All the public universities in the US and the government universities in India, central universities, state universities, are all eventually funded by the public. So public is funding this scholarship. So field philosophy is promising to be a bridge between the public and the scholarship. So field philosophy as a method transcends the dichotomy of scholarship and activism. It also transcends the dichotomy of philosophy and anthropology. It is when you raise up the arms, you raise up your sleeves and dive into the field and start working with the actual people who are trying to fight, for example, climate change or environmental issues or whatever, so many other issues they are trying to deal with. So field philosophers, if we analogize them, it can be compared with field science. Field philosophers work on site with non-philosophers over an extended period. These are philosophers who are not simply writing about public problems, but are engaged in projects working alongside people as they confront real world issues such as, I keep using that one example of climate change, but many other examples we can find. And there are now new books, new articles that are written on this public philosophy or field philosophy as it trying to deal with public, real world issues. Now, Shankaracharya, Adi Shankaracharya, one of our most revered scholars or philosophers or theologian, whatever title we use for him, Darshanik, Sant, Sadhu, Rishi, all those titles we can give him. But from an English, because we're using English language, I'm using English language for now. If we imagine Shankara as an academic, objective, empirical philosopher, we might imagine him, or that happens actually in the traditional Western scholarship. Shankara is seen as a world-denying philosopher. He renounced his family duties. He's considered as the founder of Advaita Vedanta, an ascetic order as it started after Shankara. He wrote commentaries on Brahma Sutra and the Bhagavad Gita. All of you are, many more times scholars of Adi Shankara and Advaita Vedanta. I don't have to tell you, but just a very quick summary. And he is also called as many times Prachanda Bauddha or crypto-Buddhist. He is studied by scholars, including Western scholars and Indian scholars, but also sometimes he's treated as an exception by Orthodox Brahmins because he renounced Grihastha ashram. He did not even enter Grihastha ashram, as we all very well know. He remained a sannyasi for his entire life. And so because he said things like Brahm Satyam Jagat Mithya, that is attributed to Shankara, Western scholars have now created new theories. At least one scholar I can think of, Professor Lance Nelson in California. He is a scholar of Adi Shankara and Advaita Vedanta. And in his interpretation, because Shankara did all these things, he denied his normal duties of householders. As a householder, he never entered the householder ashram, Grihastha ashram. So because he denied the world and because he said things like Brahm Satyam Jagat Mithya, according to Professor Lance Nelson, that denial of world has led to the nature devaluation in India, as we see. If rivers are polluted, if forests are denuded, if mountains are denuded, if forests are destroyed, it does not matter because world is false anyway. World is denied anyway. So nature is devalued, and it can be attributed to Shankara's ideas and Shankara's life itself as an academic or objective or an empirical philosopher. But in my response to Professor Lance Nelson, I humbly submit to him and to you all, who are all scholars of Vedanta here, and most of you anyway. In my humble opinion, Shankara should not be considered just an academic philosopher. Shankara should be considered as one of the earliest field philosophers. So as I said in the beginning, field philosophy is not a new method. Our great gurus and rishis were field philosophers, some of the earliest field philosophers. Also, of course, they did not call themselves as field philosophers. So in popular legend, as we all know, Shankar Digvijay, texts such as Shankar Digvijay, we find Shankara's legends is more popularly captured in these great legends such as Shankar Digvijay. What did he do, Shankara? What exactly he did in his life? He was a great Hindu revivalist. He was not just sitting in a cave and writing all those commentaries. He was traveling across India on foot and having these intellectual debates and shastras with Buddhists and Jains. And intellectually, he defeats Buddhist and Jain scholars and revives the great Hindu revivalism that started, can be attributed or is attributed at least partially to Shankara and his work. He also established 4 Hindu mathas across India, as we know, Dwarka, Sringeri, Joshimath in Badrinath, and of course Dwarka. So he was an activist, in my humble opinion. He was working for Hindu revivalism. He wrote Bhakti hymns. So in the West, when I was taking the class on non-dualism at Columbia University, Professor Gary Tubb, when he was teaching this course on non-duality or non-dualism, it was very hard, almost impossible for him to accept that Shankara was not just a Gyan yogi, but Shankara was a Gyan yogi, Karm yogi, and Bhakti yogi. Shankara for popular Hindus, at least, Shankara was the one who also wrote Krishnashtakam and many other hymns that were based on bhakti or devotion to many Hindu deities, Hindu gods and goddesses, and so on. Shankara was not just a normal academic philosopher. So, in my humble opinion, I think the Western philosophers, especially, are trying to imagine Shankara in their own image. That's what Western philosophers are doing, have been doing historically. They project that image probably to Shankara also. But in my humble opinion, for millions of Hindus, Shankara inspires devotion. Shankara inspires social activism and world affirmation in Hindus, not nature devaluation. Shankara's whole mission in life is reflected when what all he did. He was not just somebody sitting in a comfortable office or a Himalayan cave and just writing all those commentaries, in my humble opinion. Other example, if we can take, I think Gandhi, I would like to call also as a field philosopher. Gandhi was in environmental literature, which is my area of research. In environmental literature, Gandhi is called as a proto-environmentalist. Long before such terms as climate change or environmental loss of biodiversity, all those global warming, long before these terms, Gandhi lived and preached and practiced ideas that can now be called as environmentalist ideas. But he never wrote a theory of environmental ethics. He was not interested in writing any academic book on environmental ethics. But what he did inspires environmental ethicists and environmentalists, thousands and thousands of them across the world. And of course, Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and many, many others, Sundarlal Bahuguna, Medha Patkar, many, many environmentalists and other philosophers and activists take inspiration from Gandhi's life. Gandhi may not have written anything in terms of proper formal theory of environmental ethics, but his life is his environmental ethics, in my humble opinion. So he took ideas such as Satya, Ahimsa, Aparigraha, that is truthfulness. Those who may not be from Indic background, I should also translate here on this seminar, for this seminar. Satya, truthfulness; Ahimsa, non-violence; Aparigraha, non-accumulation; Brahmacharya, celibacy, is usually translated. I know it's not the right translation. Purushartha, self-effort, when he was spinning his own wheel, Purushartha, and Upvasa. All these examples, all these ideas he took from Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Bhagavad Gita, that he called his mother, and also from Ruskin, John Ruskin and Tolstoy, Bible, many places and people he took ideas from. But he developed his own. He was not interested in academic theories, but he was a field philosopher, in my humble opinion, as he showed from his life. So Gandhian field philosophy's impact we can still reflect, we can still see across India and across the world, actually. So when we see Vinoba Bhave, what he did in his life is a reflection of Gandhi's impact. Sundarlal Bahuguna, I already mentioned. And of course, Nelson Mandela. And before Mandela, Gandhi himself exemplified by his activism in South Africa what he was going to do in India later on. In the US also, as I mentioned, Dr. Martin Luther King is a legacy that is a live legacy of Gandhi's field philosophy in America as well. And after Gandhi, or actually even before Gandhi in 1490s, just as our previous speaker was speaking of several saints, I would like to also submit to you, even Guru Jambeshwar, founder of Vishnoi community, can be seen as a field philosopher. He was also, again, not an academic philosopher, but by his practices, he gave such great ideas that even today, even to the present day, Rajasthan's Thar Desert is world's most densely populated desert in terms of flora and fauna because of the life and teachings that Guru Jambeshwar gave to Bishnois from 1451 to 1536. The other example I would like to share here is Dadaji Pandurang Shastri Athavale. He was very well read in terms of Sanskrit philosophy and many our texts, Vedas, Upanishads, and Bhagavad Gita, and so on. But he also lived his life as a field philosopher. He practiced what he preached before he could, he was not interested in academic philosophy, but the way he practiced those philosophies inspired thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across the world who tried to practice Advaita Vedanta in their life. As this movement expanded, the Swadhyaya Parivar expanded in his entire life, we can see the reflections of Advaita Vedanta as lived by his life and his teachings. So we just heard Purushottam Bilimoria's name, also one of my colleagues, and all of our, in one way, some way, he remains our colleague here also, and he was also speaking last night. In his words, these are his words: in much Indian philosophy, one does not start with discursive critical theory or theoretical reflection. Rather, one begins with the practices that are embedded or grounded in all human cognitive and perhaps aesthetic efforts. Over time, these practices may come to be embedded in a tradition, in comprehensive doctrines, or articulated in texts foreshadowed by and prefiguring other texts. They do not ask questions about their own beginnings, historical or conceptual. So after Gandhi passed away, I think our departments are now filled with Gandhian theories, Gandhian ideas. Gandhi was not interested in all those theories, but his life inspired many, many theories. Similarly, some of the work that has been done, including my work on Bishnois and on Swadhyay, can be seen in that similar light, that after they passed away, all these great field philosophers, after they passed away, people like us, we try to come up with the theories that can reflect what they were doing in their life, the great practitioners or great field philosophers in Indic traditions. Now climate change, I alluded to already. So climate change is also one of the hot issues of our times. And this issue has to be tackled by the philosophers of current era in India and abroad. We have to study climate change from Indian philosophical perspective, what lens we can impart on this burning issue of our times, because we have great deal to contribute. What is our attitude towards non-human animals across the universe? How do we localize the mitigation and adaptation issues from Indian philosophical perspectives? How can we escape these issues that are heading our way, in a big way, with all the hurricanes and floods and wildfires and whatnot? What changes we should make in our rituals or in our theology or in our philosophy based on climate change? Things are already changing. When at Gomukh, maybe we were worshipping our glacier in one way. If glacier is disappearing, how are we supposed to do our rituals at Gangotri? Or how are we going to do our rituals at several holy rivers across India? If rivers are getting more and more polluted, if rivers are losing their basins, if rivers are changing their ways, if Sundarban is losing its forests, or how are we going to do our rituals at Ganga Sagar being one of our holiest sacred places? So on all these issues, I think we have to deal as all the philosophers in India and of course across the world as well. That's my humble submission, and I close my presentation here. I'd love to take your question. Thank you.
Sir, please unmute yourself, sir. Raghunath, sir, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear now?
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Jain, for your excellent paper on the philosophy of empirical experience. That is, Shankaracharya is interpreted as an empirical philosopher. Gandhi is also interpreted as empirical philosopher. I think this way of looking towards philosopher is something novel in character. So I congratulate Professor Jain, and we have 2 minutes. So if someone wants to comment or ask question, you are allowed to do that. Please. 1 or 2 questions, please. If not, we will go to the next speaker.
Sir, there is one question from the participant, sir.
Please, please.
Namaskar, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. My question is to Sir Pankaj Jain, Professor Pankaj Jain. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please. Quickly, yes.
Okay. So this was a very enlightening paper. Thank you for presenting such a paper, because I am also working on aesthetics, ethics, and environment from Gregorian perspective, actually. So during the course of presenting your paper, you pointed out something when you said that Shankaracharya regarded the world as Andrian, or better to say appearance. and that led to the devaluation of nature. And this is a very common point, which I also got during my, pursuing my thesis. But the thing is, Shankaracharya said that the world is appearance, but he also mentioned the levels of reality, that is the Vyavaharika, Paramarthika, and Pratibhasika Satta. So, when he said that, along with maintaining that the world is an appearance, he also said that the world is true as long as we are in the Vyavaharika Satta. That is, we are in this world. We cannot deny this world. But the world is not real in the absolute sense of the term. That is, the world is not real forever. It is not real in the sense that it was existed, it is existing, and it will exist. As we all know that whatever is created is also will also be destroyed. So in this sense, nature will also be destroyed because the earth, if the earth is destroyed, how can nature be saved? So one day nature will also be destroyed. But at the same time, it is also true that as long as we are in this nature, we are embedded in this nature, we cannot devalue nature, we cannot ignore the importance of nature. So how can, if you please illustrate or elucidate your answer, enlighten me at this point, that how can we say that Shankara very saying that the world is unreal or appearance.
Okay, I got your point. Yes. Okay. Quickly, because we have 3 or 4 more speakers, just 1 or 2 lines I'll say. This is how exactly I responded to Professor Lance Nelson's criticism of Shankara. I was quoting Lance Nelson's work on Shankara, how Western scholars have looked at Shankara and how we should be responding to Shankara, to such criticism of Shankara, because they project their image on Shankara. That is all I already said in my presentation.
Then what is your interpretation?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Madam, you will discuss later on. Now time is up. I will call upon the next speaker. Thank you, madam. Thank you for your nice question. So Ganga Bhushan, Professor Ganga Bhushan of Assam University, it is over to Professor Ganga Bhushan, please.
Thank you, sir.
Please, your department, please.
Yeah, myself, I am Ganga Bhushan. I am faculty from Department of Social Work, and I'm very happy that I have got an opportunity to share my thoughts in this seminar. First of all, I am thankful to Raghunath sir for please bear with me for this paper. So this is my paper is not on philosophical aspects, but it is on something which in social work we always confront, that is participatory action research. So I'm going to make my brief presentation here, sir. Screen is visible. In social work, we talk about enhancing social functioning of individuals, groups, and communities. And in the whole process of helping profession, we also tend to do a kind of research, and most often this research is participatory in nature. And we have some modules, we have some methods of social work practice which talks about involving people. And this paper I am focusing more on participatory action research, which we normally use while dealing with the communities. Just to introduce the action research as such, there are many terminologies used for this. It's participatory action research, sometimes it is called community-based research, cooperative inquiry, action science, and many more terminologies are there which are rampantly used to understand the communities, to understand the subjects with which we work. As we know that action research is all about, it's an inquiry, it's a period of inquiry. It interprets, it describes and explains social situation. And the main motto of this participatory action research is to empower, to improvement of those who are involved in it. So normally, this is a simultaneous process where the people who are involved into research are also at the receiving end of its benefit. It's most of the time this is locally relevant knowledge. There is no universal as such modus operandi to fit into any context. Sometimes it evolves from the people, from the different contexts. It's not an individual activity. It is mostly a group activity focusing researcher and participants. The power relationship between research and participants is both are partner to each other. So that makes the subjects are also owning the research process. And it's more educative because in the whole process of action research, the participants get emancipated in terms of their understanding. They will be able to clear about the exact problems, the sources of the problem, etc. And knowledge is advanced or generated through reflections. And in this approach, in this PAR approach, not only quantitative, but also qualitative research methods are also used. Qualitative research method like focus group discussions, ethnographic research, or all those research where people are at the center, and then different types of knowledge may be produced by action research that includes practical and proportional. As I said, that it is more context specific, so it can result into practical as well as proportional knowledge. And the main motto of PAR is not necessary to create a theory, but in the long run it may lead to a theory. How it is different from the conventional research? In conventional research, in terms of action is important in the participatory research, whereas in the conventional research, understanding begins with understanding, then ends with action. But here action and understanding goes together. And local people, the participants, the people, the subjects are owning it. Sometimes in conventional research, it is more institutional and more professional and personal. Whereas in case of action research, participatory action research, it is owned by people. And it is the knowledge is of people. And priorities are given based on the local people. And the role of researcher or the social worker here is mere a catalyst, sometimes act as a facilitator in order to promote participation of people in the whole process of this process. And methodology is chosen with an intention of empowering the people. And whereas in the conventional it leads to objectivity is given more emphasis rather than subjectivity, like in participatory research. And the problems are also identified, or the clarity about the problems are being properly defined by the people rather than the researcher. Even the engagement of people in data collection is there rather than engaging a researcher from the outsider. And so if you see the process of the research, starting from identification of the problem, then data collection, data analysis, everything is owned by local people. And it is properly shared by people, where people can correct it, can modify it at any point of time. Most of the time, there is a fixed modus operandi to begin and to end the research process, whereas here it is very flexible, where local people have autonomy, ownership to correct even the methodological aspect of it. The main purpose here is for in social work, action research, the main expectation for action research is it should improve the practice of social work. So, and since it involves action, so mostly it is for the evaluation of the work done by the social work, maybe in terms of research, maybe in terms of an intervention, maybe in terms of any change that the social workers would like to bring in the society. And it is more participative, collaborative. As I already said, it is undertaken by individuals with common purpose. Here, social work, the purpose is when the social worker try to understand the commonality of the problem, accordingly organizing the people, organizing the subject takes place. So its main motto is to achieve a common purpose. It is, as I said, it is situation based, it is context specific. There is no universal framework to use it, but it is context specific. And it develops reflections based on the interpretations made by the participants. This is the crux of the action research that we talk. And here knowledge is created through action and at the point of application. But simultaneously, knowledge plus action goes hand in hand. And in action research, it involves problem solving as well. From the beginning of the research, the problem solving process also starts. So that is the purpose of action research. And the research findings will emerge as actions, but these are not conclusive or absolute. So that is, there is always scope for changing it. And what exactly it involves? It is nothing but a planning for a change. The main motto is for change. And acting and observing the process and consequences of change. Simultaneously, the actions are being observed so that the change can be brought without any flaws. And reflections on these processes and consequences, and then replan. That is planning. Once a plan means it cannot be changed. It's not like that. Planning is just a beginning, but planning process can also be changed when the subjects are reflected properly on the process and they can replan it at any point of time. That's why it gives emphasis on acting as well as observing, because acting sometimes, action without observation leads to many problems in social work intervention. So observation is given more emphasis. That's why qualitative aspect of research is given significant importance here. Reflecting, as I said, So there is no sequence, but at the same time, the sequence is determined by the people's participation process. These are the basic assumptions why there is a need to make people as the partners. And like people who experience the problem are in a better position to conduct research on the issue. That is because they know better about their problem. Instead of external people empathizing, sympathizing with the subjects, it is the people who are the best experiencer of their problem. And what is important is everyone, so the philosophical assumption of social work is every individual has got innate dignity and capacity to change. That is there. We believe with that. So with that notion, any person can be trained with the basic research skills. And participants can establish equal partnership. That is they have the potential. If not, also that can be brought in. And PRA related activities help in it's an empowering process. It is mostly targeting the powerless, voiceless. In the whole process of this action research, they tend to get empowerment. This is the assumption. And it's more qualitative, as I said, because it incorporates the perception of participants into the research. That is from the viewpoint of the people's perception, people's point of view is given more emphasis, more given importance. And participants are equal partners, as I said. That makes the whole PAR more specific. And the ultimate goal is for social change by way of production of new knowledge. The production of new knowledge is subsidiary, it is not mandatory. But context-specific knowledge or practical knowledge is emanated. And it helps to understand the experiences and culture of population groups outside the dominant culture. That we often talk about the subaltern cultures, all those things. So when we go for participatory action research, we tend to get some unique experiences which are not being recognized by the dominant cultures. Advantages, we see advantages is that the ownership is by the participants, and there is increasing likelihood that the data will be used. uh, this results in some action. Most of the time research, like in our academic research, it goes to library. By the time it reaches to the reader, the relevance of it loses. But the action research talks about the outcome should results into an intervention, and which should be in a culturally appropriate way. And in the whole process, participants develop certain skills, and the process is very important here because they get confidence of understanding their problem, and they get confidence of feeling empowered. And this social workers encounter these are the things that we encounter mostly when we practice social work, working with communities, where communities with different identities we work with. So we predominantly use this process. And when it is used or for developing a program, it serves members of the marginalized groups. The basic motto is how the people who are voiceless or disadvantaged, their needs can be addressed. When serving as an evaluator, the social worker acts as an evaluator or consultant on various community projects, right? Whether it is government or NGO owned, sometimes community owned. There, the role of social worker is very predominant. And when using the multi-systems empowerment approach to practice, here we talk about different systems and subsystems which are linked to each other. In the action research, we try to understand the different linkages wherever the problem lies that can be fixed. Here, these are the things that the purpose is like minimize power differences between researchers and constituents, and to increase the knowledge of participants and to promote social change. Like we know that Paulo Freire's the pedagogy of the workplace, that where and another person, Kurt Lewins, who promulgated the idea where it says that knowledge flows from taking action. So there is a linkage between knowledge and action. Without action, there cannot be knowledge. Knowledge cannot be in Ethiopia. All those things are there. Research should be used to reduce the harm effects of oppression involving members of powerless groups. Most of the time, powerlessness or the distance between haves and have-nots increases because of non-participation, because of non-involvement of people who are at the receiving end of any oppression. It draws upon social constructionism and work for postmodern theorists. Like there are many that I'm not going into it because this is the domain of philosophy. But we take very few things which are useful for our social work practice. We also experience some kind of disadvantages of this method. Sometimes when social workers takes up this action research, they tend to create some conflicts among the participants, and sometimes length of time needed to develop consensus around goals and mission and method. Most of the time, while working with groups with different identities, though the common goal is there, it is very difficult on the part of social worker to make them understand that they should come together. So consensus building becomes a problem. Sometimes in the process of creating, it may be destructive. The conflict situation results in dismantling the social relationship. That has been experienced in some of the researchers. The need for training around research method. Basic research methods are to be trained. Sometimes while dealing with the illiterate, it becomes difficult. So training them on the different concepts that we academicians use, but still it is useful. The need for skilled facilitation. It is the role of social worker. How the facilitation is to address the different issues of conflict, different issues of prioritization, different issues of involvement. Like in the rural settings, it is very difficult to bring all the people together because we are divided based on caste, class, and creed. So these are the things needed skills on the part of social workers. If not employed properly, it may result in destruction. Then another thing is follow up on task completion. It's not, sir.
Professor Gangadharan, Gangabhushan, your time is over. Please conclude.
Okay, sir. Let me complete this only just 1 minute, sir.
Okay.
This last slide I will just did and finish. What the success or failure of participatory action research largely depends upon the trusting relationship between among the members. That is very important, where the social workers chip in and social workers work on the consensus. Okay, so this is very important, that trusting relationship has to be established, then only PAR becomes successful. As I already told that, minimal training is needed on the research methods about qualitative and quantitative, so that there should not be any problem in data analysis. Then establishing a good organization structure to support the working. Most of the PAR efforts in India, they get failed because they were not properly supported by the agency. The agency to come in and address the issues of conflict and other consensus related issues. The provision of strong administrative support and adequate resources for the project, because in PAR it requires the support of resources also. So with the adequate resources only, we can get success. And the role of social work is to facilitate and coordinate entire process, and all those things that we talk, ontological or epistemological understanding of the social worker plays a significant role in deciding the fate of the PAR. However, activities of PAR, intervention of PAR in India while working with different vulnerable groups proved to be very successful. So with this, I am thankful to Raghunath sir for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Gangabhushan. I have heard you after a long time. I met you in Assam University, and after that we didn't have any communication. However, I am happy to hear from you. You have emphasized on the research methodology in social work, and you have emphasized on the participatory action, so that others can be involved, so that there is a collective enterprise. And not only research will be followed by evaluation and critical estimate, and there must be some change. So action and observation will go together. And you have referred to some of the problems of the research and also their remedy. Thank you very much for your thinking on the social research. And this is not applicable only in social work. In philosophy also, this type of methodology has been taken into account. So one question may be allowed. If some colleague want to raise question, you are allowed to do that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You can, rather than asking a question, you can suggest something. Okay, please. Yeah.
I did not know from you. Like you are saying about participating in research, participation of different groups of members in research. Now, in philosophy, we also talk about observation and analysis for research. But we generally we also give emphasis on personal experience, right? We do in methodology. Now, my question is that do you consider it as an essential part of any research?
It's very important, actually. Most of the time we juggle between what is to be done and what is what I am doing. Sometimes understanding from the viewpoint of the subject is very important. Otherwise, we tend to pass incorrect information to the reader. And like to give one example, for example, most of the time research we are conducting on the subject, but we are not going back to them to rectify, to validate whether this is true or not, because that subjectivity comes into play. Subjectivity influences me to write. So sometimes it is the message, actual message of the people doesn't reach to the end, reach as an end product.
Thank you, Professor Ganga Bhushan, for your nice reply. Now we'll go to the next speaker, Dr. Ranjan from IIT Indore. I would like to request him to complete his paper within 15 to 18 minutes. Please, Ranjan, over to Ranjan.
I hope I am audible to everyone. First of all, thank you to Professor Nataraju sir for giving me this golden opportunity that I am presenting this paper. And I am also thankful to Professor Raghunath Ghosh sir that he is sharing my session, and I hope that he will guide me if I make some certain mistakes. And he is basically chairing my second paper. Earlier I presented paper at Lucknow University at ICPR Center. So the paper which I have proposed is the philosophy as a therapy and biological process, a meta-philosophical amplification of Greco-Roman and Indian philosophy. So basically the thesis which I want to propose here is that when we try to philosophize or when we try to speculate about the very notion of philosophy, so there is a one term meta-philosophy which still comes under the notion of philosophy, because when we do meta-philosophy, it is also a kind of philosophy. We still do a certain kind of philosophy. So in meta-philosophy, we need to study what is philosophy, how do we do philosophy, what are the methods of philosophy. Such kind of questions comes under the very notion of philosophy. And earlier there is a very popular notion which have become here, that this Nataraju sir has proposed that we philosopher agree that we disagree, but he hasn't cleared that at what point he basically disagree. So first of all, we have to be clear about that. And I think that there are certain things at which we all agree, and that is questions. We all agree that there are certain questions at which most of the philosophers can agree, like ethics deals with the question of values, morals, good, and so on. Metaphysics deals with the question of reality and so on. So there are certain points at which we can agree at one point or another. So this is the thing I want to say. And if I precise that, I can precise my argument or thesis that just like in the conjecture and refutation, Karl Popper proposes that rather than trying to confirming your hypothesis, we should try to reject that. We should try to find a way how can we reject that hypothesis, and then we can basically be sure about our hypothesis. In a similar manner, if we try to propose analogical thesis and say that when we have proposed any kind of thesis in philosophical realm, try to pose as much as question you can on that particular thesis, and then try to check whether your thesis is still stable or not. If it is stable, then it can help us to move forward. Now, first of all, I'd like to start with my favorite portion of Socrates' Memorabilia, where Socrates was questioned. That Socrates, you are still repeating the same thing I heard so time ago. And I hope that all of you would be agree with this thing, that I'm getting a chance very late, so lots of things I'm going to repeat. But still, this thing matters a lot, because Socrates said, yes, and what is more wonderful, I am not only saying the same thing, but I'm saying them on the same subject. And this thing can be found in Indian methodological notion, which we know as Tantra Yukti, which I was expecting that someone would present something on Tantra Yukti. So Tantra Yukti is a very ancient methodology in Indian context to conduct or write the text. In which, just like that, Artha Shastra or the Yoga Sutra or the text on Ayurveda, these are texts based on the Tantra Yukti. And I think we can summarize all of that, methodology and philosophical realm under this thesis of Tantra Yukti. So this is the thing I want to propose in the beginning. Now, with the title of my thesis, that philosophy as a discourse, as a discussion and a therapeutic discipline, I want to subtract my thesis and I want to subtract with the notion of katha and dialectics under the thesis of discourse or dialogue. And in the katha, there is a three aspect, that is vada, jalpa and vitanda. And in dialectics, we have seen in the Western notion that there is a Greek notion, how to have dialogue, how to invoke the ideas into the spirit of the others, so that we can have a better clarity on that. And this is a very prerequisite thing which we all have practiced in the history of philosophy in one way or another. Somehow we all agree that without debate, without discourse, without thesis and antithesis, without purpaksha and patipaksha, we cannot basically proceed. So this is the thing which we all agree at some point of level. Vada is, we all know about that when we try to debate for the sake of tattva. And when we say that vade jayate tattva bodha, so we have a uddeshya there, that we have settled our uddeshya, we have settled a tattva, that when we are having a debate, then we must move forward to that. And we are not going for jalpa and vitanda, which basically aim for win, or which we basically aim to refute or make the loss of our opponent. So this is the thesis. Now, this is the thing, if I suggest that when we say compare darshana and philosophy, darshana on the one hand says that prashyate iti darshana, and on the other hand philosophy is love of wisdom. So when we try to compare both, partially we do not see, or apparently we do not see any kind of similarity between them, but ultimately we may find, and that similarity can be found in the notion what is wisdom and what we want to search through the darshana. So when the basic question which comes with this thesis is that when we try to speculate the philosophy of vada, then there are certain things which we have to keep in our mind. I have kept all the things aside, like jalpa and vitanda or dialectics. So what kind of question comes in our mind is what kind of vada we should proceed for, and what kind of problem which may comes in our way, that there are certain fallacies. What is our motivation to do the research, to have the dialogue, to write the text, to interpret the text, or to deconstruct the text, and so on, and what kind of path we are following when we are having the discussion. So in that, let me begin with the fallacies, which basically comes as an obstacle in the way of vada, which basically aims for the tattva bodha. And there are some confirmation bias, just like in the Karl Popper himself suggests in the scientific realm, that when we try to prove our scientific hypothesis, rather than refuting that, we are quite biased towards our hypothesis, and we try to find the ways to confirm our hypothesis. So rather than being biased toward confirmation, we should try to be open-minded and try to be detached from our thesis and try to observe that whether this thing can be true or not, whether this thing can be analyzed further or not. Overgeneralization, sometimes due to some kind of historical lapses or whatever reason, we overgeneralize the thing, and problem occurs. And then we have heterobhasa. Raghunath sir knows very well about that. He may tell us about how Bhadika, how Viruddha, how other kind of heterobhasa basically comes as an obstacle into the way of pursuing vada. Now coming to the notion of motivation, what sort of motivation makes us to pursue the debate or pursue the vada and so on? That motivation we should try to grasp from the idea of that vade Jayate Tattvaboda, and on the other hand, Socratic notion that philosophy is basically a discipline which basically causes or invokes the idea in our spirit. There is a very famous dialogue of, Plato Symposium. So there, one of the fundamental question is what is love? So everyone is defining love in their own term, but Socrates defined love in a different manner. He suggests that I think that my one of this one, that ideas are children of the soul, which dialogue basically produces in the same way, just like that the naturally production and reproduction occurs. When two debaters sit together, if they have truly love for wisdom, then definitely an idea will be produced in the same manner as the Tattvaboda occurs when two debaters sit together with the extreme, or to say the true love for the Tattva in one way or another. So that pure love for the wisdom or pure love for the Tattva is the one of the foundational way to proceed in the same manner. So this is the thing I want to say. And in the concluding remark, I want to say that when we talk about Vada, it is quite inclusive in nature. We can be critical in our Vad, we can be analytical in our Vad, we can be analytical in our Vad, we can be constructive in our Vad, in whatever it is. But we have to keep our attention, our motivation in check, whether we are doing Vada for the sake of Vada or for Jalpa or Vitanga. This is the fundamental thing which can help us to reach the Tattva or the ultimate source of our wisdom. And now the foundational thesis or the ultimate concluding thesis which I wanted to proceed was that if you are saying that philosophy is all about inquiry, philosophy is all about Vada, critical speculation, and so on, then how, and in what manner philosophy is therapeutic? There are certain, literature on that. I read Jordan Canary, he wrote Therapeutic Philosophy. Martha Nussbaum wrote Therapeutic, the Theory of Desire or something like that, Therapeutic of Desire. And then my thesis of PhD was also based on that. And Stoics used to say that there are indeed mistakes made through the fault of our advisor who teaches us how to debate and not how to live. And students also make the mistake to come to their teacher to develop their wit and not their soul. In a similar manner, Epicurus used to say that what is the use of studying philosophy if it all does to give you certain kind of abstruse logic. In a similar manner, in the current time, Wittgenstein said that if it does not resolve the day-to-day problem of your life, and there is no use of studying philosophy. So when we have a true love of wisdom and we have a true love for the Tattva, and debaters basically sit together to find the ultimate reality or to find the ultimate Tattva at which they all agree, then somehow we can proceed for the notion. And I think at last I would say that one of my favorite texts from Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy, where the individual is searching for the consolation in philosophy. He has or she has made philosophy as his mentor, and he tried to speculate, he tried to ask as much as questions he or she can ask, and then try to converse in that manner, which can help us to reach the ultimate thesis. This is the thing I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ranjan. First,
and so one thing I wanted to say, sir, that I am a student of Professor Anand Mishra and Sachidanand Mishra from Banaras Hindu University. So
no problem. If a man can profess something, he is a professor. So thank you very much for timely finishing your paper, and secondly, your paper on Vada, which is very beautiful and also very thought-provoking. First, Vade Vade Jayati Tattva Bodha. The phrase you have taken is very real, and Vada is called one type of Katha. And there are three types of debate in Indian philosophy: Vada, Jalpo, and Vitanda. And Vada is the first category of debate because there is no ego problem, only the revelation of truth, which is the essential part of Vada. And it is one open-ended concept, Vada. That's why a theory is called Vada, Nirvikalpaka Vada, Apoho Vada, Shunyavada, that means the theory is not the final one. It is an open-ended concept. If you want, you can raise further question. And in this way, philosophy grows. And what is more novel in your thought, that you have given the therapeutic interpretation of Vada. Vada is a kind of dialogue, and dialogue, it is a therapeutic. So far as the counseling, sensitization program is concerned, a man is going to die. If there is a dialogue, if dialogue is opened with him, he will refrain from dying. So this has got some therapeutic value, which is very new, I think, in your paper. So I congratulate you, Ranjan. Please go on. You are the young scholar, so you have a lot of scopes to develop yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
So anyone, please? Any question?
Sir, I am Arun from Tripura University. I have a small question to Ranjan.
Please go on.
But actually, this is in the case of, suppose, in an interpretation of a text. Okay. Now, in the case of the interpretation of a text, dialogue definitely takes place. Okay, so the interpretation, but in that case, how do you say that that some sort of solution has come out from the interpreter or from the interpretant? Because ultimately there will be different interpretations, so it leaves the space in an open-ended manner. So how the therapy that you are talking about, how the therapy can help in this process?
Yeah, thank you for the critical question. I think that the idea of Uddesha, Lakshan and Pariksha can help us in this regard. You know, when any person writes any text, he basically proposes certain kind of thesis either in the thesis or in the introduction and so on. In Uddesha, person basically proposes the sound or basic notion, whether it is soul or being, design or whatever. So when we have that certain notion, we agreed upon that thesis that this person has this uddesha and I should follow that uddesha as well. And then he or she has also the responsibility to tell the lakshana, in what manner that thing is different from another, like philosopher from non-philosopher, soul from matter or soul from no soul, and so on. And then pariksha, then we also get agreement upon certain kind of thesis or method, that this method this person has been following, whether this method can be applicable or I can introduce any other method as well. So when we follow this idea of uddesha, lakshan and pariksha, then certain kind of idea will definitely arise. When one perspective get another perspective, like your perspective, another perspective may arise, or new idea may arise, or same idea the author is trying to propose may arise, and that definitely that thing would be more therapeutic or more pleasurable than anything else. Suppose if you write a text and I interpret the thing, or I introduce or present a chapter on your book, and if you find me that I am interpreting the same thing as you wanted to say, it would be more blissful for you as much as for me. So this is the thing I wanted to say.
Thank you, Ranjan. And what Arup wants to know, I can tell you, you are correct that there are three methods. Hello, there are three methods: Uddesha, Lakshan and Pariksha. In the Pariksha section, there is the liberty of a philosopher to interpret. And Pariksha is otherwise called Aniksha, Manan, or you may say Pariksha is a kind of self-interpretation. And that's why philosophy is an open-ended concept. It is not the stagnant water, but flowing water. What is Uttara Paksha today may be made to Purva Paksha tomorrow. And what is Purva Paksha today can be supplemented by Uttara Paksha. In this way, the water of philosophy is flowing from one mountain to another ground. So we have to accept this different type of interpretation. Thank you, Ranjan. So now I will call upon the name Dr. Mrityunjay Sinha. Dr. Mrityunjay Singh of Assam University to present his paper. Professor Singh, 15 minutes, please. Please try to finish within 15 minutes.
Okay, sir. I hope a very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, sir. Okay. Hi, please. So I thank sir for giving me an opportunity for to present this paper. My paper is on postmodernism and social science research. I am a faculty member in the Department of Social Work in this university, sir, Professor Raghunath Ghosh, sir. And my interest in philosophy of social sciences brings me here. I have interest in philosophy of social sciences, as well as I have done even written also on Gandhian philosophy. That is what bring and in social work, as madam was asking that self experience of the person is important. Yes, definitely. We in social work we do a lot of phenomenological research where we give importance to the subjective experience of an individual. We have a casework method where we work with individuals who have different types of social and psychological issues. So we do have in phenomenology, phenomenological research is practiced in social work. And earlier, I too have interest in phenomenology, and at the same time, as Professor Ghosh was pointing out that philosophy there is no finality; it is open. So in that context, postmodernism also emphasizes that there is no finality, there is no closure. The inclination to close anything, the inclination to say a final word, is what, the attempt by modernists to bring about order, certainty, uniformity, universality is what is being emphasized by postmodern research. So it opens up. It opens up if anybody is, like Sir Professor Ghosh was pointing out that philosophy is an open. There is no finality. So it opens up and tries to open up possibilities for newer ways of understanding phenomena. It has problems with whether we call it absolute truth or definitely, sir. I'll try to stick to time. I have 15 minutes. So postmodernism as a philosophy rejects traditional ideals such as rationality, order, and certainty. It is skeptical about any idea of a stable meaning. Instead, ambivalence, variation, fragmentation, intuition, and emotion are celebrated as guidelines for how we should understand the social world. And so, it attacks region. It calls it, the region as tyranny of region. And so individuals are taught and constituted in discourse, and it rejects the representational view of language, means highlighting that language cannot mirror the reality out there or people's mental states. Means so it attacks both the ontology and epistemology of positivism on the one hand, and humanism or phenomenology. We had a lot of discussions on phenomenology. It challenges both. It challenges that since you cannot represent reality with language, so you are standing on a shaky ground. You're robust on a superficial, behind that superficial layers of robustness and validity, you are standing on a clay pit, because because of the problem in the way the language is represented. So language is undecidable, metaphorical, and full of contradictions. Meaning is not universal and fixed, but precarious, fragmented, and local. So instead of language being used to illuminate something, language itself should be illuminated and deconstructed. So this launching of an alternative view on language is one of the most significant aspects of postmodern research. In postmodern research, there is a centrality of discourse. It is definitely, it grew out of French structuralism by taking the linguistic turn in philosophy. The focus on language allowed a construction that denied the objectivist claim of certainty and objective truth, and humanist and phenomenologists claim on meaning or subjective experience. So this linguistic turn enabled the postmodern rejection of subjective experience or humanism through a critique of the autonomy and unitary identities, and so it is critiquing autonomy and decenters the subject. It is decentering the subject. So it is critiquing that, and it is at the same time rejecting the objectivism or positivism through a critique of the idea of representation. It is critiquing objectivism through because of the problem of the language in representing the reality. So the emphasis on discourse means a third line of argumentation. It is rejecting both positivism and phenomenology, or humanism, which is emphasizing subjective experience. So it is emphasizing discourse. So it is not objective reality out there or human experience and meaning, but discourses that is crucial issue and things to investigate. Discourse is important in phenomenology. So language is external and real, and any potential meaning when we emphasize subjective experience, so this meaning, whatever is there, precedes any experience of what is external to it. Since experience is going to shape an intelligent understanding through language, this implies that experience is always mediated through a meaning, a text which is already available, which is already there before you experience it. The categories are already available before when somebody was saying that Socrates is repeating. So postmodernism is challenging originality, original genius. As Socrates, he was pointing out that you are repeating what has been said. So there is no in that way, it challenges originality, original genius. So the word is already there, before you experience it. Meaning is fundamentally uncontrollable, and then language, it is destabilizing, since there is no inherent quality in language that regulates the meaning. Derrida. So to note the primacy of discourse is to suggest that each person is born into ongoing discourses that have a material and continuing presence, highlighting the importance of discourse. The experience of the world is structured through the way discourses lead us to attend to the world and to provide us unities and divisions. Same like, discourses means highlighting that discourses place a person in the society just like a status and role, structuring the people in the society like, similar to a status and role, providing them different status and different roles. So the point which is highlighted is that, it is not the individual who is speaking. It is the discourse which is speaking through the individual. It is the discourse which is speaking through the individual. So individuals, criticizing the subjectivity and phenomenological, that, the subjective experience or, in that way. So as discourses structure the world, they at the same time structures the person's subjectivity, providing him or her with a particular social identity and a way of being in the world. So here, this is contra humanism, or we have a lot of talk on phenomenology. So they are mistakenly claim the personal self as the origin of experience. This is what phenomenologists, this is what postmodern Derrida and others, Michel Foucault, they are critiquing and rejecting, challenging. So everything, whether it is gender, family, life, all this are employment, career, sickness is constituted within discourse. There is nothing outside discourse. So there is, for example, there is no essence. There is no essence. There is no essential or universal meaning attached to all these concepts. So basically, it is discourse, which is important according to postmodern research. Again, apart from centrality of discourse, the postmodern approach also highlights the identity. Earlier I heard Professor R.P. Singh from JNU. He was talking about decentering of the subject. So all of you have heard about how subject or self has been decentered. And the identity is
fragmented, and there is a lot of fluidity, and so and not just that, even this pandemic, the kind of the change which is going on, any attempt to create order and uniformity, which was the project of modernity project, that is questioned here, by this idea of fragmented identity, and this is also, we have to understand in this fast-paced change which is going on in the world, and even the pandemic, even the COVID pandemic also seriously questioned the science. When we say that science, you are very confident that some of the major powers of the world, when they were if someone is so it brought the weakness, or challenged the most of the assumptions, even scientific assumptions. That is very much real, when it is said that fragmentation of identities. Third is this is critiquing the idea of representation. Irrespective of how one conceives objective reality, we don't have a direct access to it. Only it is linguistic practices are central to object production. So postmodernism, argue for the deconstruction of the decoupling of the signifier and the signified. There is no photo like relationship between language use and objects. The meanings vary across signifiers and signifieds. So, and the fourth point is, since I have a time constant also, loss of challenges the meta narratives, foundations, or master narratives, and so here Michel Foucault and other, even Derrida, they are pointing out that these are hoax. Meta narratives are hoax. They have been used to support dominant view of the world, the significance of discourse, and the inability of language to represent
or to represent, contribute to a general skepticism towards the meta narrative. Means the language itself is, metaphorical and, undecidable. So how can you, build a, meta narrative which itself is standing on a clay pit? It's like building a colossus on a clay pit. So that's how, even Michel Foucault highlights that, knowledge power connection, they presuppose each other. So knowledge and power, both, for example, unless there is a knowledge about, criminal system or criminology, then only, this entire prison system and, he goes on to, this, Michel Foucault on surveillance capitalism, again in the contemporary times, surveillance capitalism, Michel Foucault. So somewhere, knowledge and power, are, supposing each other, now, for research purpose, so the role of the analyst is not to get behind the discourse, to find out what really people mean when they say this or that, or to discover the reality behind the discourse. The starting point is that reality can never be reached outside discourses. Reality can never be reached outside discourses. And so it is discourse itself that has become the object of analysis, for research purpose, as per postmodern research. So discourse analysis. So in discourse analytical research, the exercise is not to sort out which statements about the world in the research material are right or which are wrong. On the contrary, the analyst has to work with what has actually been written or said, or so exploring patterns, exploring patterns across statements, across texts, and also trying to understand.
Conclude, please. Huh?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 2 minutes, sir. 2 minutes. I conclude, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So exploring patterns about the social consequences of different discursive representations of reality. Again, here sometimes, discourse analysis is also challenging the commonsensical understanding, because in the society in which we live, we take things for granted. So, so it is here that it is challenging the common sense understanding that has to be investigated, and, because, the way they have been naturalized, and promote dominance, and, since, we have, so, the importance of this approach is that, it is opening up possibilities for newer ways of understanding the, the phenomena, challenging the dominant discourses, very, very important. And so, yeah. So there is a need to, unpack, and unmask, these concepts, and, and so, deconstruction, very, very important, which is very, in fact, empowering. Since I come from social work, this is very empowering for marginalized people. This is very empowering for marginalized people. Feminists have used it, and when we say that they reject binaries, the way the concept of gender has been expanded, sir. Now LGBTQ, all. So this gender is not binary now. Earlier we used to think that gender means men and women. Now this concept of gender has been, from binary, it has been expanded to, LGBTQ, lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgenders, and queers. So this, again, postmodern, so moving away from binaries. So research here becoming a matter of deconstruction, and thereby highlighting the fragility behind us, superficial level of this method of research promotes plurality, methodological pluralism is emphasized, local knowledge is emphasized here, and situated knowledge is, this is what we emphasize in social work also. So, and it rejects the search for universal truth, and many examples of deconstruction provide valuable insights for the it also for the reflexivity of social. So just 1 minute. Reflexivity of social research, and so it provides means any researcher must in the beginning must clear his stand and also highlight how his contribution to the postmodern research or discourse analysis is going to impact the earlier understanding on the subject, so that the readers have a better understanding of the position of the author, as well as what he or she is, what is the aim of the researcher. So it questions the phenomenology essence. Again, I don't know, in Advaita philosophy, here, there was a lot of talk on Advaita. So, here postmodernists will go for, multiple understanding reality or truth, absolute truth, in multiple ways, or, maybe, not even accepting that there is only one truth. It opens up. It opens up that, when we say that Advaita, there is only one truth, merged together. So, it questions that, that line of, that there is only one truth, the truth. It questions the truth, the truth,
Mrityunjay, please stop. We will go for lunch and other things. So thank you very much. And sorry that I have to interrupt you. When you are emotionally reading some paper, it's a crime for the part of the chairman to stop in between. So I have committed the crime and I have to get punishment for that. So however, duty for duty's sake, I am doing.
No, sir, postmodernists promote questioning.
Okay, thank you. Your paper is very good. You have enlightened in a new thing, phenomenology and postmodernism as a research method. According to you, language is always metaphorical. It cannot give you the true picture of reality. So always it needs deconstruction. And that's why rejecting, you are in favor of rejecting objectivism or positivism. So subjectivity is the only way to have social identity. So this type of interpretation is found in Buddhism. When they say language cannot give you the true picture of reality, it's a kalpana. But only the encounter with the truth, which is called Swalakshana, can give you the actual picture of reality. Thank you very much for your nice paper. As a young man, I wish you will go ahead, much ahead with your research work. Thank you. And I would like to close the session here. And I am grateful to Professor Nataraju and others for giving me scope to chair the session and hearing 4 brilliant papers. Thank you all the speakers and all the commentators and Nataraju and other colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for your insights and for your words. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Raghunath Ghosh, sir. It's nice to hear you after a long time. Thank you so much for chairing this session. And I thank all the paper presenters, Professor Pankaj Jain, Professor Ganga Bhushan, Dr. Rajan, and Dr. Mrityunjay Singh. Thank you so much for your scholarly and very lucid presentations. All the papers were very good, and it was really an engaging session. So thank you so much. And now we will take a lunch break for maybe 30 minutes, and then we will again assemble here around 3:15. So we have actually one more session before valedictory, and in our last session we have around 4 speakers, Dr. Kanchan Gopte and Dr. Saurabh Todaria, Dr. Shaumakanti Vishwas, and Amit Deshmukh. And chairperson of that session is Dr. Akhuizam ma'am. So we will be meeting here again sharp at 3:15. So that's all. Thank you so much. So, ma'am.